At this point, we'll get started. And again, thank you everybody for joining us for the webinar to learn a little bit more about the ESOL, managing ESOL rosters in the i4see system. And so I know this has been long awaited, and we're looking forward to finally being able to get this new application out and available to everybody so you can manage your ESOL rosters and hopefully have more accurate and thorough information. So I believe Melissa White, as many of you know, has been helping with overseeing this work at the department. And unfortunately, Melissa, you're not connected on the GoToWebinar in a way I can get you to speak. So I apologize for that, but I know I'm going to say some words that I know Melissa was hoping to say. Melissa wanted to make sure that she welcomed all of you and wanted to let everybody know that the department is finally looking forward to being able to release this system, which we know, as I mentioned earlier, has been overdue for quite some time. Please also realize that what we're going to show you today is just the beginning. We're looking forward to not having this something where we launch for the ESOL directors and the other folks in the field to start using without the continued support and continued enhancements as we move down the road. So we look as this being just the beginning of the start of a new beginning in terms of entering and managing your rosters through the i4see system. We're going to go ahead and I'll do some introductions in just a minute. We've got a great team of folks on the call today, as well as all of you out there in the field. We're going to spend some time walking through the functionality of the new application, and then we're going to do it a second time through actually a live demo. So we'll do it once through walking through some PowerPoint slides so you get an idea of what's included, and then we'll do it a second time, which hopefully will give you a chance to really better understand it. Finally, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Everybody's muted right now, but you can raise your hand if you want to speak. There's also on the control panel for GoToWebinar, there should be an area where you can enter questions. So if you find the control panel on your screen, there is a section for asking questions, and feel free to post your questions there, and we'll be monitoring those as well. As I mentioned before, we've got a great team here. And all of us are in one way or the other looking forward to helping you and supporting you as we move forward. Melissa, as I mentioned earlier, who is the administrator for academics and assessments, she has been helping kind of lead the overall vision of this, going to provide more support to schools. So thank you, Melissa, for that. And we'll look forward to, please look forward to helping reach out to Melissa as you need support. Additionally, Aaron Hughes, who many of you probably know already, is a Title III officer, is on the call as well, and he's been helping all of you out in the fields and will continue to be able to provide support. Wendy Perrin is also on the call, who many of you know from her work throughout in the state in the past as in the ESOL world, and she'll be here going forward, we hope, as of Friday, providing some additional support as well. Joe Sherburne, who's on the call, is the mastermind developer behind all of what you're going to see today. We all can't thank Joe enough for all his crazy hard work he's done over the past several weeks to incorporate ESOL into i4see, and hopefully you'll all be impressed with what he's done. I know Joe is, also views this as just the beginning and is excited to get your feedback both today and going forward to continue to improve the system. And then, as I mentioned, I'm Mike Schwartz. First, we'll go through a walkthrough, and again, as I mentioned, we're going to do it a second time with a demo. The new system what we've done is taken a separate system, the ESOL system, and have incorporated it into an existing system that's been in place for a decade now, the i4see system. And with that, there's kind of a couple of benefits. One is it's more integrated directly with i4see. A second is that we can take advantage of some of the functionality that's within i4see, and then also hopefully be able to create additional enhancements as we go forward, both as we're making changes in i4see as well now directly with the ESOL application. The other benefit to this is that there'll be greater access to the system, and we can control that access. You can control that access at the school districts. So we'll talk a little bit about what access exists today, but realize too that that's something that's configurable and manageable at your local school districts as well. All of you who've been updating the rosters in the past have always gone through the My NH DOE login, and you'll still do that. The only difference is rather than seeing a system called ESOL, you'll see the system called i4see. For those of you who are existing i4see users, you will see your current access, which is usually called general user. For those of you who only have ESOL access and haven't used i4see in the past, you'll see a system role called i4see, and it'll be labeled ESOL monitor or something to that effect. And so you'll have access to the i4see system, but only for updating your ESOL rosters. The other thing I should point out is that this probably isn't working quite yet. The system's working in our development environment. It's in the process of being uploaded to the production environment. So it may be even as I'm talking, they're finishing the last steps to get it into production. If not, then hopefully by the end of today or the next day, this will get the system will be available in production as well. And if it's not available right now, we'll certainly email everybody on the call so you'll know that when it is available. And again, it should be hopefully by the end of the day, the latest. Once you launch i4see, for those of you who are familiar, there's a menu item on the top of the system. And within that menu item, under a tab called Students, you will see something that says Real-Time ESOL Student Roster. And so this was a new addition within the i4see system. For those of you who have access to other functions within i4see, you'll see lots of other things, sub-menus under Students. For those of you with just ESOL access, you will just see at the top of the menu something, an item called Students, and under that, you'll get into the real-time ESOL student roster. The other big change or significant change I should point out even as early as now is that we've gone away from this idea of having a collection 1 and collection 2. Rather, you have just, as it kind of implies, real time throughout the year, you should be keeping your rosters updated. And there's no distinction between this collection 1 or collection 2. You'll have a constant roster of students. We, in the background, will be able to use things like the i4see beginning of year upload to know which of those students were enrolled on October 1st. And for certain counts. We'll be able to identify between your roster and what comes in on what's called the end of year submission in i4see. We'll know which students were there during the testing period and who should have tested and things to that effect as well. And let me also just mention Joe and Aaron and Melissa and Wendy, if there are any questions that come up or you want to add anything, please feel free to interrupt me. So once you log into i4see and you go to Students Real-Time ESOL Student Roster, you'll basically see a screen that looks just like this. And this is the main screen that it looks somewhat familiar to what you might have seen in the old ESOL world. And there's primarily 7 different areas of the screen that we'll talk through. But it's the place where you'll be able to view your roster, add students, remove students. We've opened up the functionality a little bit. So in the past where you might have had to call the department, now you'll be able to do that on your own. And as an example, for instance, if you've got a student who was in a monitoring status, but the parents, through the dialogue with the school and the parents who decided to return that student to receiving services, you'll be able to make that change yourself. Obviously, only after you've got the parent approval. But this is the general screen. And I'm going to flip over, I think I can do this okay, to my Word document and just mention there is also a handout that we will send. I had hoped to post it right on the control panel, but for some reason it doesn't seem to be allowing me to post it. But I'll send this out to all the folks who are on the call. And this is a kind of a 2-page tip document that walks you through all the different components of the system. So please don't feel like you have to take notes real quickly. All of this will be available to you, and we'll send it out, as I mentioned, right after the call. Additionally, this webinar itself is being recorded. You'll be able to watch that as well if you want to review anything. So looking through these 7 different functions, the first was just getting to that page, and that's how you clicked on the students in the ESOL roster. The second one is once you're on that page, you'll want to view a certain roster. And so you'll be able to view either your entire school district, or if you only have access to a school, then you'll be able to view your school's roster. Joe's made it really, he's done a couple of really nice things to this. One is he's improved the performance quite a bit. So you should see it being much more snappy and faster when you go into this to view your rosters. Similarly, when you first come in, your roster should already be displayed for you. I see there's some questions. I just want to make sure there's nothing that I should answer right now.
Hi, Mike. Yeah, there was one clarification question about will they be able to continually add students to the roster and delete students from the roster?
Yep. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, whoever asked that. Absolutely, yes. You'll be able to continue to add students or remove students throughout the year. We've kind of taken away or opened it up in terms of making that more flexible and easier for you to do. And you'll see where you do that in just a minute. I mean, actually, good segue to write this screen right here. The first thing we wanted to point out is where you can view rosters, and then if the student's not in your roster, this also is where you add students. And I think Joe may give a demonstration of this in a little while. But this is the place where you can both view your roster, and then that roster appears below this, as well as adding a student that might not be in the roster. Just to be clear, when you're viewing students, when you're viewing the roster, you're viewing all the students that are in your roster as of the current year, and that includes anybody from somebody who is currently receiving services to somebody who might be, in their 4th year of monitoring. All those students will show up in your roster. The second area of the screen, and again, if I flip back to this real quickly, just to show you, this being the screen, the second area is this area where you can search, or the third area is this area where you can search for SACIDs.
Mike, we got a quick question related to the roles. Will districts need to add security roles for staff?
Thank you, Aaron. Again, thanks for that question. We are in the process of running a script that'll automatically make anybody who had ESOL access, active ESOL access in the past, those people will automatically have access to I4see as an ESOL administrator. So they will only be able to get into ESOL within I4see. So that should happen behind the scenes. If there's anybody that obviously has maybe new to your school district and didn't have ESOL access, those folks you will add yourselves. The I4see coordinators can add them themselves within your school district, but we will automatically port anybody over who had ESOL access. And if it wasn't clear, I think there are I want to say there are several hundred folks in the state who had ESOL access before. Some of those folks already had I4see access. So if you already had I4see access, you won't need to be added. You won't need anything added. You'll automatically, under that student item, you'll automatically have real-time ESOL access. For those of you who didn't already have I4see access, those are the ones who we will be generating a new role for, and that'll happen automatically. And again, that should happen hopefully by the end of the day today, if it hasn't already. Student search, so this lets you search for a student it's only within your roster. So if you want to search for somebody who you believe is already in your roster, this is where you put the SACID. For those of you in small schools that only have 10 or 15 students, you can just look through your roster on your own. But in larger school districts, if you don't want to look through the entire roster, you can type in the SACID and search for it right there. And Joe, too, please feel free to chime in if I'm missing anything, but I know you'll have a chance when you do the demo as well.
Yeah. We'll be able to, have some additional review on some of these things.
Great. And thanks, people, for the questions and for Aaron and Joe chiming in, because otherwise I feel like I'm just talking to myself for quite some time. But anyway, I'll go on. So the fourth area, so again, the first area is how you get to this screen, the student and their ESOL roster. The second area we talked about was viewing your roster. The third one we talked about was searching for SACIDs. Anytime you search or view your roster, you'll see a list of all those students will appear. And you'll have 3 main tabs. So there's 3 separate tabs on those roster lists. The first is a list of your full roster. So these are all the students who are currently tied to your district or school, depending on what you're looking at. And if you're looking at a district, you'll see all of them, in the one list, and you'll see the school name there for each of the students. That'll show you a list of all the students, and again, anybody receiving services or anybody being monitored. The second tab allows you to look for potential missing students. And so what Joe's been able to incorporate here is a list of students that are not in your roster this year. As a matter of fact, they're in nobody's roster this year, but they were in the roster last year. And for one reason or another, we believe they may still be in your school. So as an example, if there was somebody in the roster last year who is not in anybody's roster this year, they didn't exit the state last year. They were in school through the end of last year, and they're showing up in your class submission. There's something called the I4see class submission where schools submit class rosters of all your students. So if that student all of a sudden is showing up in one of your classes, we'll let you know that this may be a missing student. Maybe somebody, they may have been ESOL in someone else's school last year. They may have been in your own district, but for some reason they're not in your roster this year. So this is one way we hope to just make sure that everybody's accounted for and just give you a list. It doesn't mean that they need to be in your roster, and maybe it's a student that was in school through the end of last year, but then moved out of state, at the beginning of this year, and nobody reported that to the department. So those are folks you want to look through, and you want to make sure that you know why they're not being added to the roster. You'll be able to add them directly from that tab. There'll be an add button where you can add them to your roster if you choose to. And then if you've got a question about why the student's showing up and you just don't think they should be, by all means, pick up the phone and call us or email us. And then the third tab says students return to LEP services. As I mentioned earlier, you will have the ability in your student roster to take somebody who was in first year monitoring, for example, and once again, upon approval and consent of the parent, if the joint decision is made, you'll be able to change that person back to receiving services. So we want to make it very clear who those students are, because there is that important step of confirming with the parents and making sure everybody's on the same page. So we actually created a tab that lets you kind of monitor anybody who might have been returned to services in your roster. Oh, the other really nice thing that Joe's given us, two really nice things. One is you can click on the column headings. So realize that if you click on student status, for example, it'll sort the students all by status. And the other nice thing that I know some of you, especially in larger districts, are going to really appreciate is the export to Excel. So you can also export to Excel and export your roster directly into Excel. The next thing is to mention or show how you can edit students. So again, along that roster, for each one of your students, you'll see an edit button. And so the edit button allows you to edit some basic information. This is similar to what you've seen in the past, but it lets you edit the student status, and it lets you edit the primary language. I think that may be new. And then also add comments. So two things. One is, as I mentioned earlier, you'll see the editing the status. You are able to do some things that you couldn't do before. But the other very important thing is the primary language. We realize that there's several students who do not have a primary language specified. One of the things we're going to ask you to do, and one of the first things hopefully you will do, is to make sure all your students have a primary language specified. So a great way to do this is come to your roster. You can click on the column heading primary language. All the ones without a primary language will float to the top or move to the top. And then you can just go through, edit them, add their language, add the next one, add their primary language. This is important because we have a submission to the United States DOE that's actually due at the end of this week. So we'd like to make that as accurate as possible. That's not going to be the end of the world if you can't get them all updated, but we really appreciate any effort you can do this week to go through and update the primary language for your students. This also, when you click on edit, is where you'd remove a student. So if the student is no longer in your roster, again, maybe they moved out of state, or for some reason they're no longer in your roster, you can click remove, and they basically will remove that student from your school. Two more areas to point out, and I think then we'll wrap it up and take a look at the demo. One is the viewing the student profile. So if you go ahead and click on the student SACID, student ID, and let me actually see if I can bring back that Word document real quick. So if you click on the SACID itself, so that's blue SACID has got a hyperlink to it, that will bring you to some detail about the student. And again, similar to what you saw before, just hopefully a little bit more accurate in terms of the results that you'll see. And again, I can't stress enough, as I mentioned earlier, this is just the beginning. So as you find things that you think would make life easier, let us know. I know Joe's extremely excited about trying to make this as valuable for all of you as possible. Similarly, if there's some data that doesn't look right, please reach out to us. We're releasing this out now, so there may be some areas that we've got to make corrections, but again, we'll be here to help continue to improve the system. So when you click on that student, it'll show you both their history from a roster perspective, so it'll show you what schools they were in the past years. And then also, if you scroll down in that screen, you'll see a history of their scores. So you'll see their scores throughout, the history of their access scores. One thing to point out is the history, the detail for each of the the rosters for each one of their years. We've added some columns, and you're not seeing them all here, but you'll see it has whether they improved in terms of their growth, whether they made proficiency. That's further to the right, but we're not seeing it. We're only calculating the improvement method and the proficiency for 2019 and more recent. So you're not going to see that information for some of the older data. That was one of the things I know that there were some concerns that schools had in terms of the algorithms the department was using to calculate that information. And so we've done a really good job. We think we've done a good job at making sure it's accurate for 2019, and we'll continue going forward. The other thing to point out is that that information is not going to be available for your 2020 roster. We don't yet know if a student improved, obviously, because we haven't gotten the access scores back yet. So until we get the access scores back, that information won't be populated. But as soon as we get it back, it'll be populated once and it'll exist, and we'll automatically tell you the status in terms of improvement and proficiency for all your students.
Hi, Mike. We just had a question about access results. The question is, will the information about access also have information from other districts if the student transferred, I believe?
Yep, no, that's a great question. Yes, and the answer is yes. So the students, and that's the nice thing about i4see and some of the systems at the department, the data moves with the student. So yes, as long as the student took the access test within New Hampshire, those results are stored with the student. And when a student transfers to you and you add them to your roster, you can right away click on their SACID and you should see their history of scores.
We also have two more questions. One is, can we get detailed explanation of how the data is gathered? And do we know if it will be getting access scored? So let me,
Do you know what the
follow up on that.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So the scores come back from WIDA to us. I know that Melissa's been working with WIDA to have them get all the scores that were completed before we all went into this social distancing virtual learning mode. So once we get that data from WIDA, we will import the results. And there's kind of two steps to it. One step is us getting those results, and that's where we can determine whether somebody's proficient. In terms of growth, the department works with another group called Center for Assessment, and they take the results from WIDA, they compare that to national results to determine what is typical growth for students. And then coming out of that, we're able to determine whether students were on target to their typical growth. So that's the kind of the flow of the data. The last piece I should mention is we also then, once we get the end of year file from the i4see submissions from each school saying here's all the students that were in our school this past year, then we're able to also calculate who should have tested, because that's kind of another indicator. And we don't really know people should have tested or people who were in your school during the testing window. And we don't really know that until we get the end of year file as well. So I don't know if that helps, but those are kind of the files we get in, and then we'll be, Joe's made it really nice that once the file comes in, it's very easy for Melissa or one of the administrators to push a button to calculate all the results and populate it for everybody.
Thanks for clarifying that, Mike. There were two questions now related to the access scores, and I believe the question really was, is the timeline going to be the same for that score, the results file to be sent to us? And I think this is something that Melissa will probably follow up with our WIDA colleagues. So we can put that one.
I'm sorry, Aaron, can you hear me?
Yeah,
hi, Melissa. Yay!
Could you repeat the question?
Will access scores for this year still be delivered in the timeline previously provided, or should we expect a delay?
Yes. No, it should be provided. For the most part, they have everything. There were a couple of schools that sent their information in that they haven't quite been able to get access to because of the state of Minnesota is actually on a lockdown, they're like sheltered in place. But once they feel pretty confident they'll be able to get everything to us within the time frame. I did want to just mention to everyone too that right now the access validation window is open. It opened up April 16th and it goes through the 27th of April. So if you haven't had a chance, if you could go in and take a look, we just want to make sure districts have the opportunity to go in, just kind of validate everything that they see. I know there were a couple of schools that had found like some double entries and things like that, and a few mistakes that were made. So we have been able to go in and fix that with DRC. So if you do have a chance, we definitely encourage you to do that before April 27th.
Melissa, thanks for mentioning that. We have a little follow-up question, and it is, what are we doing about students who couldn't finish because of COVID-19?
Great question. And so we have made the decision that the students that did not take the test, they're not going to be required to take the test, and then that just won't be scored.
All right, thank you. That kind of brings us up to date. Oh, there's another question that just came in. Access validation, is that for all testers, paper and online?
Yes. They should be able to go into DRC and it should be the administrator that's looking at that, whoever the administrator is for the district.
Now, the follow-up question about the students that couldn't complete the test, will districts be held kind of accountable if a student wasn't able to finish?
No, absolutely not. And the nice piece about having that assessment and accountability waiver that we have through the U.S. Department of Education is that it applies to all of our assessments. And so for the schools that were not able to administer that test, no, there's no worries there.
Thank you.
Melissa, I apologize. We had technical problems before, and I'm so glad you're on now. That was great. That was good to hear. Thank you for that. Okay, so we talked about the student profile. So this is where you'll be able to see. You can click on this asset, and you'll drill down and you see the history. And as we mentioned earlier, you'll see that even if the student came from another district. The last piece to mention is within the screen, kind of an area to look at are some reports. And so there's two primary reports that you'll see. There's basically a report for your current active students, and then there's a report for last year's students. And so this is just a way to be able to, get a full list of last year or this year of all your students with some of that proficiency and growth information on it as well. So those reports will basically give you a straight report of all your students. These are only for the active list. It's only your active students. So it's students who are currently receiving services or parents denied or teacher unavailable. It's that list of students. As I mentioned before, again, we won't have the growth or proficiency information at this point in the year, so that information will be blank on the report. And then last year's will give you the full list of students, and it'll give you a list of including whether they, for each one of the students, their proficiency as well as their improvement status. Okay. I think that's it. As I mentioned earlier, for some reason I couldn't attach the handouts to the GoToWebinar control panel right now, but I will email both the PowerPoint and this one-page handout to everybody on the call after we're done. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joe. And Joe, I assume the easiest way is to give you control.
Yeah.
To show your screen.
Let's see here. Make sure I'm showing the right screen.
We got it.
See it?
We see it. It's a little small. But we
Perfect. Oh, sorry. A little better?
Nice. That is
all
better.
Right. Well, welcome everyone. I hope you're having a nice Monday so far. Like I said, we do apologize. It doesn't look like the production updates are in the system yet. Looks like DOIT is still trying to get those into the system. So we should have those updated by the end of the day or by earliest tomorrow morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by entering the i4see application by using the ESOL monitor role. So that's going to be the common role for all the users who just have access to the ESOL application. So if I go in and I select that role for i4see, as Mike had showed you in the PowerPoint, we're going to see just the students section with the real-time ESOL student roster. So that's really the only thing that you're going to really have available to you outside of some help items. But under students, you just click that real-time ESOL student roster, and then it will load up that page for you. Okay. I will say you might see that some things are a little bit wonky. That's because I have to use the Internet Explorer. But using i4see, it's suggested that you use Microsoft Edge or Chrome, just so it works a little bit better. All right. So when you get into the page, you're going to see your basically the same thing Mike said. Your everything is going to load for you. So you have your roster here that will automatically load for you. If you do have access to additional schools, you can select that from the menu here. So right now it's under all schools. So I'm under a district role where I can access all the schools within the district. And if I want to select a particular school, let's say I want to do the middle school. So I'll select the middle school and then click View Roster. So once I click the View Roster button, the roster down here will change. It will update the student that I have for that particular school in the roster. And then it will give me this Add Student button here. Okay. Now, a couple of things with this Add Student. You can add a student to your roster that hasn't been an ESOL student before, or that has been an ESOL student before, and it will add them either way. So if there is a student in the potential missing tab here, and you want to add this student to your roster, you can just click this Add Student button here, and it will add that student to the roster. So there's a 162, so student unknown to roster. So we removed all the names. So now we have the 162, and now this changed to 9 in the roster instead of 8, and then 0 potential missing students. Okay. If we
Hi, Joe. We have one question. Will everyone have access to all schools? I work in more than one school, or can it be set up for me to have access to more than one school? That's a question from the field.
Yep. Yeah, good question. So that would have to be altered in my NH DOE. We'd have to grant access on a district level instead of the school level. And I'm not quite sure. Mike, do you remember how we scripted that out?
Sure. So for those of you who in ESOL had access to the district, then in i4see you'll still have access to the district. For those of you in ESOL that had access to just the school, in i4see you'll have access to just the school. But as Joe mentioned, typically it's the i4see coordinator within your school districts that can manage security access. And so if you only have one school, access to one school, and in i4see in this new ESOL component, your i4see coordinator can go into the single sign-on system for your district, and they can basically, what they do is they delete out your school number. And so if they get rid of your school number and it's basically giving you access to all schools, then immediately when you log in the next time, you'll have access to all the schools instead of just the one. Just to clarify too, if you want access to 2 out of 5 schools, for example, in your district, the system doesn't allow that. It's either all schools or one school. So if you need access to 2 schools, then what really has to happen is you have to be given the ESOL access once for one school, and then the second time in single sign-on for that second school, and then you'll have to log into one at a time. But hopefully you'll either have access to one school or to all the schools in your district, and that can be managed.
Great, thanks for answering that, guys. We just had one more, and it's related to the adding the student. The add student feature does not include the student name, neither does the potential missing student feature. So I think the question is, and now you have the screen up for SACIT, so I believe you locate the student by SACIT. If you're going to add a student, they have to have a SACIT. But the second part of the question, neither does the potential missing student feature. So maybe that refers also to, Yeah, go ahead.
So if we go to, let's see if we can find another one here. Oh, I eliminated it. The potential missing students, I believe, also shows the name, but to like search within the list, it is by SACID. We can add a student name search function here if that's something that may make it a little bit easier for the fields. So instead of searching for a SACID, we could also put in a first or a last name field if that's something that may be easier for you guys in the field. And if we did, okay, so to go back to the add student functionality, if you were to add, put in a SACID and find, it would show the name of the student. And if that student was in another school's roster for that particular year, you'd have the ability to actually transfer that student into your roster. So you have the ability now to take a student from another school and to put that student into your own roster. And we do have a log, for anyone who uses that feature. So if there's, a student in, say, the Claremont, say the high school, Stevens High School, and so if we take this, so if we copy this SACID and then we go back to, let's say, the middle school, and we put in this SACID. Oh, not found because we changed the names. But in production, you'll see the student's information here, and then you'll also see a transfer button. We've kind of edited the files here regarding the student names, so it's not showing the student, but you'll see a transfer button here. You click that transfer, and it will ask you to confirm that transfer, and then it'll make an entry into our log table, and then it will enter that student into the school's roster, and you'll be able to see the updated student roster number here with that student. So that's a nice little feature that we added. So now if you have, I know that there was a lot of issues last year regarding where students were in a different school, and we had to remove that student from the other school in order for the other school to add that student to the roster. So now you guys have the ability to kind of take that student from other people's roster. Okay. Any questions so far? And we send the information to the new school.
We're looking pretty good on the questions right now. What if someone leaves? Can we send? Yeah, I see you reading that one.
Well, if the new school has the SACID information, they should be able to have access. They should be able to add that student to their roster and then have the access to the information for that student. If regarding like the information regarding like access scores and whatnot, I'm assuming. Yes. Yeah, they would be able to retrieve that information once they add it to the roster. Then they'd be able to go into the student's history. Can the person who has access in GMS be given access to this?
I'll answer that one, Joe. I'll type an answer for Kelly. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. So we have the select roster section here to recap. If you have multiple if you have access to multiple schools, you can select a school, click view roster, add student here. You can enter in the SACID, the view student profile. So if you select enter in the SACID here, and it's not in your roster, you should still actually be able to view the student profile there. And then you have the student SACID search section, excuse me. So if you have a large roster and you want to search for a particular student, you can enter that in the box here and click search, and then you'll be able to find your student. And I can add in the name fields in here as well, so it'll act the same way. Enter in the first and last name or last name and or first name, and it will show you all the students that match as such. Clear, and you'll be able to clear the grid again. And let's see, so if we go back to view student roster, we don't have any more potential missing students. The return to LEP services, that will show, as Mike mentioned, that will show the list of students that were returned to LEP services with parental consent. You don't have access to edit them here, but this is a subset of data from the student roster. So if you do need to edit anything regarding the student, you can edit in the student roster section. So as another thing that Mike went over was regarding editing the student. So there's a few things when you click edit. You can edit the student status. You can edit the primary language. You can enter in some comments. Okay. So this student is in first year monitoring. So since it's in a monitoring status, the only thing we can do is we can select the return to LEP services with parental consent. And then we can update the primary language if we need to. What are the choices for status? So if they're in monitoring, the only choice you're going to have is to return them with return to LEP services with parental consent. And then the other one would be if they're in currently receiving services, you have eligible parent declined services and eligible ESOL teacher not available.
Joe, there was one question, and I'll read it to you. It starts with, it would be helpful if the sending school could push the information to the new school too, because sometimes families don't report that the students need services. So I believe this is like an in-state transfer question.
So can you repeat that, Aaron?
Yeah, will it be, so I'm going to try to paraphrase it. Will it be possible for like a student that is marked as leaving a school district in New Hampshire to send, and they know the school district that the student is going to, that school district can push that information to the new school district? If I understand the question correctly.
For the
Almost like
sending
populate
district.
that other roster with that student. Yeah.
Correct. Do we have is there a capability to do that now? No. Can we? We certainly can. If that's something that would be useful. The receiving district can, of course, if they knew that they were supposed to be receiving a student, they can take the student from the sending school. But we can certainly add in functionality to do it.
That's a good clarification.
The other way around.
So receiving district, if they know that they're receiving a student, they can take that student. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
I think the other thing to point out, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, and we probably modify it if I am wrong, but if you're a school, and the question, I guess the concern was that if I'm in Bow right now and I've got a student and the student's being transferred, I know the student's going to go to Manchester. I'm worried that Manchester may not know the student is ESOL and the parents may not say anything. They may be there, even in a monitoring status. As soon as you, if you remove the student from Bow, and if Manchester has uploaded that student in their course or class submission or some other submission, they'll show up in Manchester's potential missing students.
Potential missing students, yes.
Yeah. So even without you telling them, they'll show up there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And if I go to, if I go to a different roster, is there any third year? Yeah, so to Leanne's comment, we do have, so they will be in first year, second year, third year, or fourth year. You'll be able to see their monitoring status regarding first, second, third, or year, or fourth year monitoring status. Any additional questions so far?
Kind of going through them right now, just keeping an eye on the time too. Looks like we're down
Yeah.
to like
Okay.
10 minutes. Some of these
Okay.
questions, we can create a little white paper and answer them and send them out too.
Yep, perfect. So another thing, you know, we're trying to, you know, increase the functionality, you know, for you guys. So we tried to enter in, you know, add in some, you know, sorting capabilities. So if you, like Mike had mentioned, if you click on any of the headers, you can sort by, you know, student status or SACID. So you can do that. And then also there's the export to Excel function. So it will allow you to download the list of students here. So if we open up that, you'll be able to see it in an Excel format. So then you can, you know, have this, you know, locally for you guys, okay? And then as Mike mentioned, there's a couple reports here. So student roster report active and then last year. So you guys will be able to click on those links and be able to see, you know, your student roster reports. So I know these reports should be updated in production and as well as the other updates that we have. They should be going into production soon. So everything, as Mike mentioned, everything being in i4see, it allows everything to be more integrated. We're able to kind of have a little bit more functionality with the data and kind of tighten things up. And so we're looking forward to the next, you know, few weeks or so to really get additional information and feedback from everyone, just to see what else we could put in here that will make your lives easier, you know, for the system.
Oh,
okay.
Very good. Thanks, Joe. The last question was related to students that are removed from service. What are the options for students that are removed? And will the data system distinguish? Let me go back down. Want to distinguish between the 4 years of monitoring? It would be, and then another question, it would be how it would help as a receiving district. Maybe that's from another one. Yeah. So
once you remove a student, it will be removed from your roster.
okay, that's pretty
And
straightforward.
then that will yeah, basically it wouldn't really show up anywhere on your roster anymore. So when you remove, so let's say Elton John here, and we click remove, it will be removed from your roster, and you wouldn't be able to see.
And we just had one follow-up question on that. It doesn't ask why the student was removed, and I think that is the question. Why doesn't it ask?
Okay, like a status.
Right.
A removal status, yeah. And that might be something, you know, we can get together with Mike to see, you know, building additional, you know, status and collecting that in our log information. That way we can kind of keep track of that. So I know this is functionality that we never had before. I don't believe there was a way for field users to actually remove a student from the roster. So we'll have to build out those statuses and you know, make sure that that's integrated with that process.
You know, in the meantime, one thing I might suggest is if you edit a student, you can add in the comment section. In the comments, you could say, you know, student moving out of state or something to that effect. Save it, and then go ahead and remove it. And then at least we'll have that comment. But we'll definitely put that as an enhancement as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that information is already in I4see, because if the student's moving out of state, your district is going to be taking them off of their roster, and state having to give information as to why.
That's a good point, Melissa, and that's right. And that's why it's nice these are integrated. So let me, Aaron, tell us if there's any more questions, but I will, Joe, why don't I take control back and share my screen?
But there's one more question, and I think it's probably a good point for us to clarify. It says, once you add student with SACID, will it automatically generate assessment ID?
No. So if the student, so if you add in a SACID here, the assessment IDs are actually created automatically when a district requests a SACID. And so so every year there's a rollover. So if the student has already had an assessment ID in the past year, every year there's a rollover. And if all the students that are in the table, the student assigned SACID student assigned SACID table, if they don't have an assessment ID, one's created for them. If they did the previous year, it's recreated. So if you enter in a SACID in this section and they're not a student at all, then it will let you know that couldn't find a student. But if they are a student, their assessment ID will already have been created within the system. So that's how that works.
Will this system maintain the assessment ID as well? I haven't.
Within the student roster table, yes.
All right, thanks for clarifying.
Okay, so just to wrap up, wanted to talk a little bit about next steps, and let me also wrap up by saying, Joe, thank you so much for doing that demo, and for thanks on behalf of everyone for all the hard work you've been doing to get this up and ready. In terms of next steps, so as we mentioned at the beginning, there is a submission that we have to provide to the NH Department, the U.S. Department of Ed at the end of this week. So we're hoping that folks will have access to this by the end of today, and that you could spend a little bit of time over the next couple of days trying to review your rosters and just making sure they look okay. Again, you know, we only know you can do what you can do, especially how crazy things are right now with the virtual instruction. But so the next steps would be, one is for you to review your rosters, add or remove students. And the second is to review the primary language and try to make sure you've got the right primary language for everybody. If I go over to the site, just as Joe was showing us before, I just want to reiterate. So come into your site, click your roster. You can select a school if you want to do it one school at a time. And then one, make sure you've got the right students, but two, again, if you click on the primary language column, all the blank ones will pop right to the top, and then you can just click the edit for the student, enter in the primary language, and click save, and you will have updated their language. So it should be a fairly straightforward, hopefully, for you to do that. I mean, I'm assuming obviously that finding the primary language is not that difficult. So hopefully you have that. And then the last thing that I know we all five of us on the call feel very strongly about is, we want to be here to help you. We don't want you all to struggle. This is hopefully fairly straightforward to use, but again, we know it's new for many of you. So please reach out to us with questions. If there's anything you're trying to do and it's taking you more than a couple of minutes to figure out how to do it, just send us an email or give us a call, and we would be more than happy to help walk you through it. And if you're having difficulties, other people may too. So it'd be great to know what you're struggling with, and we want to make sure you don't struggle. So please do reach out to us. Melissa or Aaron, Joe, are there any last questions or comments?
Oh, thank you for participating in the webinar, and
Yes,
thank you
thank you
guys.
very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for putting it together.
No, we look forward to hearing your review on the system, and we hope to push out these updates that you guys send to us rather frequently, so to speak. So then we can kind of get this into a nice, smooth system for you guys to use moving forward.
So with that, I'll just thank everybody for joining us. As Aaron said, I know all of you are working so hard across New Hampshire to help support the schools during the virtual instruction. I mean, I just can tell you from my view of what I've seen schools do over the past 3 or 4 weeks, it's been absolutely amazing. And everybody is just doing such a great job, and they're all working so hard. So thank you for everything you're doing, especially when it's really hard to reach some of these populations like the ESOL population or special ed population, these other folks who are frequently underserved. So thank you everyone for what you're doing. With that, I can't believe it's 2 o'clock and we finished right on time. So have a wonderful rest of the day.